Next up, we have Jack Campbell, the linebacker out of Iowa, who is a guy that, I'll put up the athleticism and, the intangibles right now and say that we could probably spend the entire video just talking about this right here as talk about one of the big winners from the combine. The 4.65 40 isn't the craziest thing in the world, but when you consider the height weight combo with it, it's pretty freaky, right? As someone who's 6 feet 5 inches tall, 249 pounds, the 4.65, a 37.5-inch vert, 10 foot 8 inch broad, very solid as far as the 3-cone and shuttles, and just a really impressive athlete all around. Did you always see that on film? Maybe not to the extent that we did in Indy for that combine, but very impressive regardless, and is someone that certainly has some athletic upside, to say the least, even in more of a prototypical linebacker's size, right? The modern game is going to smaller and smaller linebackers. Well, it seems like Jack Campbell's kind of the opposite of that, but he still has that level of athleticism, which could definitely make him an intriguing combo here for teams at the top of their linebacker board, frankly. As far as some of the stats are concerned, you can see it here. Really came on the scene as a junior and continued that through his time as a senior, right? Was really impactful across the board as far as not only a ton of tackles, but was, making his name in the backfield as well as far as tackles for loss and a sack each season's concerned. Had multiple interceptions each of those last 2 years. 6 pass deflections in 21 I thought was noteworthy, as well as obviously the forced fumbles and whatnot, as you can see there. So very impressive physical intangibles and traits, very impressive statistical production. What is there not to like about Campbell, right? And we'll put up my grade on the screen now. I don't think there's much not to like. At the same time, I don't know if we always see those traits, and as great as that looks and as elite as those traits seem to be, I don't know if we always see that on the field. So as you can see here, I still really like him. 79.18 as far as my final grade is concerned. My cutoff for a first round grade is 82.5. So more solidly in the second round than anything else. I'll be honest and say that at this current time, I haven't graded Trenton Simpson or Deion Henley, and in that regard, Campbell is my linebacker 1 of the guys that I have graded, which includes the likes of, Henry Tuatu, Noah Sewell, Ventrell Miller, DeMarvion Overshawn, Dorian Williams, Ivan Pace, Drew Sanders, D. Winters, Aubrey Miller, right? There's a lot of names that I've watched. I just haven't got my film on Washington State, all 22 really, for Henley. And Simpson's a guy that I watched and could probably give you a roundabout grade for, but really want to go back in and refine things before I give a final. So currently my linebacker 1 in what I would say is a weaker linebacker class. Even if Henley is an all-pro caliber guy, having said I haven't watched him, even if he's great, this is still a decently weak group, I would say, at the top end. Some more solid options, I think, into the middle rounds, and as you get into sort of that late third, early fourth, and started day 3 range. But I think sort of at the top, there's not a ton of bodies, and in that regard, Campbell, even though I think I would feel comfortable taking him in the second, I think Campbell might even go higher than that and, sort of encroach upon that first round territory, and at the very least sort of in the 30s of the second round and at the start of day 2. So as far as how that grade breaks down, as we put on some film here of him versus Ohio State in the background, it's just going to be solid across the board, right? There's going to be a couple areas where I think he is rather impressive, and others where I think it's a little bit lower, but still solid. No horrible, great areas of weakness or major deficiencies in his game, as you guys will get a sense of as we go here. So range and pursuit right off the bat, I gave him an 11.25 out of 15. I thought he was rather solid. I thought the pursuit angles at times could be a little bit shaky, could be a little bit flat every now and then. But overall, again, this is really where you see the speed and you see the athleticism take form. Did I think he looked quite as athletic as he showed off at the combine? At times. Others, not quite as much, which maybe comes more back to an IQ and awareness type thing, right? If you have a guy who runs a 4.6, but it takes him a second and a half to make a read, then he might not look like a 4.6, right? Because he's getting to that play late. And I think there might be a little bit of that with Campbell, where perhaps sometimes the speed and athleticism doesn't shine through because of maybe some difficulties making the correct read right off the snap and not really wasting any movement, but at the same time, solid as far as range of pursuit is concerned. Nice little coverage rep there coming across the field and reading that one. And we'll just hop into that next, I suppose. Coverage, I gave him another solid grade, 12.25 out of 15 for me, which again, it might not sound good, but while I'm talking about it here, I'll pull up the comparison and sort him versus the rest of the class. That's the third highest grade of anyone in this class as far as coverage is concerned, and I would say the highest grade I've ever given there is a 13.75 to Owusu Koromoa. So it's not like I have Campbell too far off at the 12.25, but I think it's a strength of his game. I think you saw the impact he was able to make as far as the ball skills were concerned. In particular, it's going to be a play in this game, which is rather impressive to say the least, that I'll shout out when we get there. But I thought he was solid again in terms of coverage and making an impact in that regard, and didn't look like a fish out of water like some of these linebackers do, especially a guy his size. Many people in his shoes, it feels like maybe they'll be okay working side to side and forwards, but backwards is just a whole different animal. It felt like Campbell was able to do a little bit of everything and never really looked out of place doing it. I think he's probably better in zone than man. I'll be honest, just from an instincts perspective, it felt like, hey, give him this small little area to cover, or give him that decently sized hook zone to cover, and he'll make some plays. You saw it earlier. He can key into the QB's eyes just fine, but at the same time, it felt like you put him across from a twitchy slot receiver, and that's just not a good matchup, right? To me, that's more on the coaching staff, though, than anything Campbell necessarily does or doesn't do. Next up, another grade that I don't think should come as a surprise, even just based on the film we've seen. I haven't really called it out, but block shedding, I gave Campbell a 14 out of 15. I would say he is one of, if not the most physical guys in the class, just as far as that is concerned, as far as being able to take on blocks in the hole and make a play, right? Kind of how I was saying earlier that he has that old school linebacker size. Well, at the same time, you add in the ability to get off blocks, which is, the 14 out of 15 is actually the highest grade I've given a linebacker in that category in 3 years. It's a welcome change compared to a lot of what we're seeing now, right? These modern guys who like to evade people and run around them. Campbell's willing to take them on, and more often than not is able to do a good job shocking the blocker, getting hands on, and really discarding them quickly enough to still make an impact and bring down, 140 tackles or whatever it was over the course of a season, right? Just rather impressive in that regard. As far as one of his, what I would say, weaker areas, I've already touched on it slightly, but I have IQ and awareness as a 10 out of 15, which isn't again, it's not a horrible grade. If we bring it up and compare him to some of the other linebackers, I have him IQ and awareness-wise lower than Ivan Pace, than Noah Sewell, than Henry Tuatu, but higher than some other guys like Drew Sanders and DeMarvion Overshawn, etc., right? I didn't hate the reads that he was making. At times, I think the time it took for him to make them, you'd like to have seen sped up a little bit, right? I felt there were just instances where if you put another guy in his shoes, say, even a good example that you guys might not know would be like a Ventrell Miller. It just felt like he could process things at just a much radically quicker rate. And it felt like by the time Ventrell would almost be there making a play, Campbell would make things harder on himself because now he's given the offensive line more time to get there. And yes, he's good at taking on blocks, but it's almost like, well, hey, that block wouldn't have been there if you were able to make that read quicker in comparison to some of the other guys in the class. So a little bit of a negative there, but by and large, solid, right? I mean, it's tough to really complain. And I will say one other thing that I've heard quite a bit, reiterated a few times through the process, is that Campbell's been working with Luke Kuechly, which is interesting, and something that is hard to really quantify. But if you're training with one of the most instinctive linebackers of my generation, maybe that's a grade that could go up, right? And perhaps has already went up through the course of this offseason. In that regard, maybe good on Jack Campbell for knowing what his greatest weakness was and finding the best guy on planet Earth to help coach him up. Do I think just being around a great instinctual guy is going to make him one? Not necessarily, although at the same time, you kind of look at last season and you see what we heard every single 49ers game that people would say about, oh, Talanoa Hufanga trained with Troy Polamalu, and you kind of roll your eyes at it the first, 47 times you hear it, but then he keeps on getting insane picks and, forcing these radical fumbles and putting points up on the board, and it's kind of like, well, where there's smoke, there's fire. Maybe just having that guy as a mentor is actually incredibly useful and did help him improve his game, and I'm hoping for Jack that guy is Luke Kuechly, and maybe we can make that 10 into a 12 or a 13, and that would push him into the first round, right? So it's a grade that I think is a little bit lower now, but potentially could be an area that he's already improved upon if he doesn't continue to even at the NFL, right? As far as some other categories, I gave him a solid grade as far as quickness and change of direction is concerned. I think you saw it during those shuttles and whatnot. I think you see it on the field when it comes to just changing directions and making plays, whether it's some of those reps in coverage, working backwards, then side to side, then, just following the QB's eyes, or whether it's whether it's him on a QB spy, for example, against some of these more athletic QBs, just very solid, right? And can he whiff at times in the hole one-on-one against an elusive back who's known for making you miss? Sure. It'll happen every now and then. But by and large, I thought he was solid in terms of an ability to change directions and do so pretty seamlessly, especially for his size, right? I would say pretty seamlessly relative to the whole crop of linebackers and sort of what I'm looking for in that grade. But relative to his size, I thought it was more impressive than anything else, right? Finishing and tackling at times I thought could be a little bit sloppy. Again, kind of on the flip side of that, still I gave him a good grade, but it's an area where I think for his size, I almost would have liked to have seen him missing less tackles. As far as, that is concerned, I think maybe the IQ and awareness played a role in that, just in terms of potentially if you were able to make a read on some of these plays quicker, you'd put yourself in a better position to, be coming straight downhill rather than maybe having to make a diving arm tackle, for example. Not saying that one was bad by any means. I think that was a decent little job working the cutback, and I think that's kind of where you see that change of direction ability, right? There is some lateral agility there, especially, again, I keep saying it, but for a guy his size, which I hate to repeat myself, but it is an important qualifier, all things considered. Many linebackers in this class are 6 feet tall, 6 feet 1 inches tall, 222 pounds. So to have a guy like Campbell who's got 20 pounds on him in a couple inches, I think it's a big deal when he shows off similar athletic traits in that regard. Otherwise, motor, I gave a very solid average grade to. I didn't think he necessarily stuck out one way or another. There weren't plays where he was loafing and not giving effort at the same time. I didn't see, some Herculean, some Herculean plays either where he's never tempoing down, for example. I felt like just exactly what you would expect out of anybody as far as motor was concerned, where there's some positives, some negatives, but by and large, very solid. Otherwise, final two grades for me are just kind of that catch-all size and general athletic scores, and obviously he scored well on those, right? So as you can see in that regard, I like Campbell in a lot of different ways. There's not a ton of areas where he's just flat out bad, and I would go as far to say none of these areas are flat out bad. For those who are a little bit unfamiliar with the way I'll grade, I mean, I'm not afraid to give a guy a 4 out of 10 in a category if he's not up to par, right? And guys can get that and still, make up for it in other areas. I didn't think Campbell had any areas like that. There weren't any major weaknesses. There were a lot of, 6s and 7s out of 10s and 11s out of 15s and 12s out of 15s, right? I would say really the lowest area and the one that I'm most concerned about is the IQ and awareness. But again, I think he might already just be taking the steps to improve that. And yeah, in that regard, that's really all I have for you guys as far as Campbell is concerned. I actually think that's a great play to end it on. This is the interception I was referring to earlier. There's quite a bit of time left in this cut up, so we'll just end it here. But again, great feel there for, being able to both keep one eye watching on Stroud and tracking him in the pocket, but at the same time, realizing that a receiver is entering his zone and he might have a chance for a great play. Then you see the phenomenal ball skills as he makes the diving INT, and just a very solid, very, very solid interception there. One of the best that you'll see. You're not going to very often see plays better than that. But that said, that's pretty much all I have for this one. You see just plays over and over. You see the good block shedding. You go back and play. You saw him try and backdoor play, which again, I think is maybe he's overestimating his athleticism, or maybe that's just an IQ thing again, right? And I think it just keeps on drilling back down to sort of where we're at as far as the grade is concerned. I think a very solid second rounder, someone that I would not be mad about on my team, as long as they didn't go crazy and draft him much earlier than I'd expect, right? I think if he's a guy that went really anywhere post pick 25, 30, I wouldn't feel too mad about it, but I'd really like to get him into that second round, all things considered. I say it every video, but I only have 16 first-round grades so far in this draft class, albeit missing some of the top guys, right? So Campbell being solidly in that second round, you'd think if there's less than 32, which there naturally will be at this point, you could kind of move him up accordingly, and I think that's how we get to him being off the board in sort of that 30-40 range. So with that said, if you agree, if you disagree, I'd love to hear why in the comment section down below. We are going to cut this game off here, though. Obviously, linebackers very rarely, if ever, come off the field, so I don't want to sit here and keep talking over this film for for an extra 15 minutes, and I think you guys will appreciate that as well. So if you want to see other All-22, subscribe to Caddy Cutup's Patreon page, but otherwise, it's really all I have for you guys in this one, and I will see you in the next one. Hopefully you enjoyed. I'm mic'd up, now I'm mic'ing out. Peace, guys. See you next time.